This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. Starting today's show is Marsha Boswell, Vice President of Communications for Kansas Wheat, with a wheat update for Kansas growers. She explains what people saw from their crop and what conditions were seen around the state. K-State livestock specialist Joel DeRouchey keeps the show rolling with reminders for 4-H'ers when it comes to caring for their livestock at the county fair. Raymond Cloyd, K-State horticultural entomologist, ends the show discussing a variety of summer insect pests, including bagworms, the Japanese beetle, the Harlequin bug, and lace bugs. That and more is coming up ahead on Agriculture Today. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our Thursday show giving a wheat harvest update with the Vice President of Communications for Kansas Wheat, Marsha Boswell. Marsha, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for the opportunity to talk about Kansas wheat harvest.
Absolutely. Marsha, how did wheat harvest kick off this year?
Well, this year's wheat harvest started early, especially compared to last year, but compared to an average year, it's probably about 5 days to a week early getting started. Harvest does start in south central Kansas every year, and people were able to get started around the first week of June, which is just a little bit early. And it has progressed in the same fashion. They're just wrapping up here in northwest Kansas in the next couple of days. They should be finishing things up there. It's very early compared to last year, where it continued throughout the month of July, but it is still early compared to an average year as well.
And what different conditions did we see around the state for people who were growing wheat?
In the fall, the conditions were variable, and based on whether or not they had good drilling moisture, that continued throughout the growing season on the variability of the crop. So if they had good moisture in the fall at drilling and they had the opportunity to get that stand well established, then it seems that continued throughout the growing season into better yields than some of the places that didn't get a good fall stand. Majority of the state, there was decent moisture throughout the winter, and the crop came out of dormancy in February, a little bit early, and was looking pretty darn good compared to last year, the last couple years. And so I think there was a lot of enthusiasm for, the crop is looking really good right now. And then we had some dry spring weather in March and April, and it really went back downhill and was not doing as well because it didn't get those spring rains that it really needs to come out of dormancy and thrive. Then in mid-May, we did start to see some rains and some cooler temperatures than we sometimes see during that grain fill period. And the wheat kind of perked back up and started looking better as we were approaching harvest. In the south central part of the state, the far south, yields were much better than expected. People were, I think, surprised by how good the wheat was performing during harvest, how well it was yielding. Then as we maybe got into the next tier up from the south, in kind of the middle part of the state, they hadn't received those May, early June showers like some of the other places did. And so it was still a struggle in that area, with yields being quite below average, and even into southwest Kansas as well. Highly variable based on whether a field got timely moisture or not. The same county or the same area could have fields that are only a mile or two apart, and just one of them got rainfall and one didn't. And so yields kind of showed that. Some places they were in the upper teens and 20s, where other places were up into maybe 30s and 40s and even higher yield-wise. We did see pretty decent quality throughout the state this year. Test weights were 60 pounds and higher for most of the areas. Some of those drought areas had really good protein levels at 12% and higher. And then kind of as harvest progressed farther to the north, some of the areas in like north central Kansas and northwest Kansas, benefited from some of the timely rainfalls during grain fill and had above average yields and were doing really well. And then the rains continued into harvest and kept some farmers out of the fields to finish up their harvest. And so we have seen some of those test weights go down a point or two and yields diminish a little bit from where they should have been because that mature wheat was getting some rainfall on it.
As prices have been changing and the value that farmers might be seeing for their crop also changes with that, there is still quite a bit of value from the wheat crop still in the field.
So with harvest pressure, with some of the things that are going on globally in the wheat market, the price isn't where we want it to be. But there are some benefits beyond the value of that cash price of the grain. And one of those things is the residue that's left behind. When we had multiple drought years, and so it's really nice to have some residue left in some of these fields that can benefit the next crop in terms of improving the yield of the next crop, if they go in with corn or something else. And then also just protecting that soil. We did see some soil blowing this spring. And so if you've got residue on the field that's protecting the soil from blowing, capturing some of that moisture throughout the growing season, and keeping the heat off that bare ground, those are some of the values that wheat brings to a cropping system beyond just the cash price.
Did you see the Kansas wheat farmers really having any major difficulties this year?
I think for the most part, the difficulties were if their field wasn't one that caught some of those scattered showers during optimal times. So there's definitely areas that still had a lot of drought pressure that didn't get the recovery from the drought that we would have liked to have seen. There was some rust pressure coming in from the south. And so there's fields that have been affected by rust. And there was a difficult decision at the time that they were applying fungicide of, well, is this crop going to yield well enough to make it worth applying a fungicide? And I think that with that rust pressure coming in and the great grain fill conditions we had, those who applied a fungicide saw a benefit from that. And so there wasn't as much rust as there could have been by people protecting the crop. As far as other diseases, there's some wheat streak mosaic virus. Triticum mosaic virus is a little bit higher this year than we've seen in the past, which is also transmitted by the wheat curl mite. So I know that there's some resistance in varieties to specifically the wheat curl mite or wheat streak mosaic virus, and some of that carries into Triticum mosaic. But I think there's an opportunity to look at the genetics and having that resistance to not only wheat streak, but also triticum and then high plains virus. There are a lot more resistant varieties out there than we've had in the past. So that's really making wheat streak less prevalent maybe than it has been in some of those past years. But this is a really good time as we're wrapping up harvest to think about next year's crop and controlling the volunteer. If we continue to get rains, if some of that volunteer that spits out the back of the combine starts to emerge, we just need to be really diligent about getting that under control and stopping that green bridge from this year's crop into next year's crop, and just being a good neighbor and stopping the streak, controlling your volunteer, making good choices for next year's crop as well.
Beyond the wheat harvest, Marsha, anything exciting taking place at Kansas Wheat?
Well, there's always a lot going on. You know, we're looking toward the next farm bill and kind of monitoring some of the Kansas priorities for that in terms of reference price and the safety net that crop insurance provides. We have an effort that started in Kansas that's been taken to the national level to separate continuous and fallow enterprise units, because those are two completely different cropping systems and they produce different yields, different types of production. And so we are working with our national organization to bring those to Congress and try to get that included in the farm bill so we can benefit our Kansas farmers. Other than that, it's the 150th year of turkey red wheat coming to Kansas. The first harvest was in 1874. And even today, many of the varieties that we grow in Kansas have some lineage back to turkey red. So it's really just an exciting celebration of the bringing of turkey red to Kansas from the Mennonites who brought it here, had excellent farming practices, and kind of changed the way wheat is grown in Kansas. Prior to that, it was a soft wheat crop, and it's a hard red winter that is perfect for bread making. And so that just changed the whole background of the wheat industry in Kansas and the milling industry.
Marsha, if people would like to find out more information from Kansas Wheat, how can they do that?
Well, you're always welcome to come to our website at kswheat.com. We also have social media channels, mostly Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And you can follow us at Kansas Wheat. Throughout harvest, we did harvest reports. So if you want to know anything more about this year's harvest and this year's crop, you can find that right there on our website. And, if you want to sign up to get future reports, we do put out weekly news releases, and you can sign up to receive those on our website. We also have some e-news twice a week, specific market reports that we offer to our Kansas Association of Wheat Growers members. And so if you're interested in getting that information, you can find out how on our website or contact our office, and we'd be happy to share that information with you, and we'd love to have you as a member.
Marsha, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Thank you very much for having me.
That was Vice President of Communications for Kansas Wheat, Marsha Boswell. I will link the Kansas Wheat website in today's show notes on agtoday.net. We're cutting to a short break now, but stick around because we have more for you ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we continue our show talking about animal care before, during, and after the fair. And then to talk about it, we're joined by K-State Extension Livestock Specialist Joel DeRouchey. Joel, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me in to talk about this topic.
Joel, first, starting about thinking about the animals at home before they even go to the fair.
Yeah, it's an exciting time here in Kansas, and really throughout the states, throughout the Midwest, county fairs are starting. And one of the things that we really encourage people to think about is, getting the animals prepared before they even go to the show, of just how that they're cared for, what we can do. And a couple things in particular become really important. One of the biggest mistakes I see a lot of families make is if those animals have never been on a trailer, or the only time they were is when they were real small when they purchased them, is trying to load them for the first time when they want to leave for the fair. And a lot of times those animals don't want to go on a trailer. They're nervous. They haven't had that experience. And that can cause the animal, and in particular the family members, a lot of stress trying to get animals loaded that just simply don't know what to do to go onto a trailer. So we often encourage families to load those animals on a trailer, even just drive them around for a short period of time, come back home, take them off. Couple days later, do it again. And that way, when you go to load for the fair, those animals are under a very low stress or anxiety level because they just think it's a routine thing to do.
And also make sure those animals are healthy before they even go to the fair.
Yeah, one of the things, and we get into this time of year, we just want to make sure that they're staying cool at home, but part of that, too, is that they're healthy. And again, as we get closer to fair, most, for our market animals that'll end up going to a locker or be sold for the meat for somebody else, we have to really start to be cognizant of withdrawal times. And so we'd encourage, if an animal does get sick here before fair, or we'll talk about in a little bit here at the fair, working with a veterinarian to make sure we're using the proper antibiotics, if needed, to make sure we have the right withdrawal strategy in place depending when your fair is.
You mentioned a little bit about getting that animal comfortable on the trailer, and say you've done that, you've gotten to the fair. Important to get that animal back off the trailer pretty quick.
Yeah, one of the things that we really like to do and encourage, if the 4-H members and family can actually set the stalls or pens up before they go. So oftentimes it's, if the animals need to arrive on a certain day, A lot of times the fairgrounds and the livestock committee allows people to come in a day or two before that to set up their stalls, set up their pens, and have their equipment, everything ready. And that really does help that animal. Once it's hauled to the fair, you're actually able to get it off the trailer faster. Again, with the heat, and most trailers have a major lack of airflow. So instead of just hauling all the equipment, hauling the livestock, setting it all up at once, if we're able to have all the pens ready, then we can get those animals off the trailer, they get into their pens, and again, that should be a lower stress time for not only the animals, but for the family as well, just less chaos or less activity going on once those animals need to arrive.
Are there a few ways that people might want to set up the pens to hopefully reduce the spread of illness?
Yeah, one of the things is we look at both from an illness and then just a comfort, a coolness standpoint. Oftentimes, some of the barns are going to be arranged so all the fans go the same way. That may help keep all the airflow going so all the animals stay cooler, and then also from a health standpoint, those animals are very much intermixed. And so again, as you try and have any separation that's possible, a lot of times trying to prevent nose-to-nose contact, we recognize that's really hard when a lot of these pens, and you're going to be penned next to somebody else that has livestock. But what we do encourage, if there's enough space, that's where you can create your tack pens and basically have tack in a pen, then the animals, then tack, and so on. And anytime we decrease nose-to-nose contact with any animal, that's certainly a huge plus. The other way that we really encourage is individually watering. So at times at fairs, we can see that there's kind of a community water area, especially for cattle, even sheep and goats. While those are convenient, we have to recognize that all animals are sticking their mouth in that water, and that really is not getting clean and sanitized that I've ever seen during a fair. So while that is convenient, I would encourage families to think about watering their animals individually with their own buckets or whatever they have to water, not necessarily using a community water tank or area that really gets exposure to all the animals.
And thinking about sharing things, even just the simple tack things, maybe keep in mind?
If you've been to other spring shows or summer shows, we always encourage the cleaning of those. And hopefully, I think most families do a really good job of, if they've had feeders, water buckets, that it's clean and sanitized in between shows. And again, I would just encourage that as a good practice. Any equipment that's brought in from your home, if it's muddy, dirty, just clean all those things off good. One, it helps just decrease any bacteria that may be coming that you're bringing from your place, from your dirt or soil or bedding. But also it just gives the fair a better look. So when community members and the general public come by, we have equipment that looks nice, that's clean, that looks sanitary. And again, that just gives everybody a better impression.
And what should people probably keep doing even as they come to the fair and are in a different setting?
Yeah, so one of the things that they'll just need to keep in mind is, how do we keep these animals comfortable? And again, depending on the species, that could be different. One of the uniform things, though, is airflow. And so having the right amount of fans, getting hot air out of those barns. A lot of times our covered barns will have air vents at the top or in the roof to get that hot air out. We just need to make sure that we have the proper airflow. But then also for pigs, sheep, goats, cattle, there's wash racks that we can use about any time. So if the animals are getting warm and you feel it's best, you can go ahead and rinse them off. But again, making sure they're comfortable while they're at the fair. Probably one of the other things I'll flip around to is, after the animals are shown, we use a lot of hair dressing, so some of them could contain oil, some of them don't, just really to kind of help that animal get a better show ring appearance. One of the things that is a must is that after the show, it's very important that all those animals are washed with soap to make sure that we're getting all those oils and hair dressings off, because oftentimes they help hold in heat, especially in pigs. That oil will really heat that animal up because they don't have the ability to sweat that off. And again, what a mistake I see a lot of families make is, once the show is done, they don't then further rinse or wash those animals. I would contend that's almost the most important point after the show, because if those animals are going to a locker or they're going home or it's hot at the fair, those animals will get hotter by having all those hair dressings that made them look really good for the show itself.
Even if the animal's been well taken care of, sometimes sickness still happens. So finding that local vet or the vet who's for the fair.
All county fairs that I know of would have a designated or on-call veterinarian. And so if animals are sick, again, getting them involved. And most times an animal may just have a little fever. It may not be warranted going home by any means, because I know that's always a concern. You've had the animals for the entire year, and we want to just keep them healthy. So getting the local vet involved is a treatment needed, or has the animal just been stressed a little bit? Oftentimes that the animals won't eat as much feed at the fair, at least the first day, because they've been hauled in trying to figure out that new environment. That doesn't mean they're sick. It just may mean they have a little stomach upset and they just need some time to get it figured out. So again, working with experienced breeders and veterinarians in particular to help is a must, and that way the animals are cared for at the fair, but also once they leave, they go home in the best possible health as well.
What might the humans, need to do to hopefully keep themselves and their animals healthy?
As we've talked already a little bit, making sure that they're well cared for and prepared before they come to minimize the stress of that hauling. And then when they're at the fair, one of the most important things is continually providing clean, fresh water. We know a number of people that will provide automatic waters or have a PVC pipe, with a drinker for different types of, for our sheep, goats, pigs in particular. And those are all good, but that water should be changed out a couple times a day. It's hot, and that water is going to get the temperature of the air outside. And so what we generally encourage is hand watering with a bucket, 5-6 times a day. With my kids, it's every 2 hours, those animals. We need to make sure that they're being watered. And when we provide that clean, fresh water, that by itself will help keep the animals hydrated. One of the other things that in a mistake I see a number of families may make is that they tend to overfeed the animals once they arrive at the fair. So you always got to remember, how much are we feeding them at home? And after you haul them, again, those animals are going to be a little stressed. Don't give them the full amount on the first feeding. Oftentimes we're feeding about half the amount. Let them clean that up and then come back in an hour or two and let them finish. That way they're not consuming so much feed at once. And also some people have a tendency to try and, make their animal look better by really want it full. And animals do look good at a fair once they're full. But don't try and feed 2 times or 3 times how much feed it normally eats. It's just going to cause digestive problems, and then that animal will go off feed.
And Joel, what about for those animals that come back home after the fair?
One of the best things to do is just be very observant. So most animals are going to handle that transition just fine, but if they got exposed to some pathogens or bacteria or viruses, they may get sick. And so we want to pay extra attention and contact a veterinarian as needed if the animals do in fact get sick when they come home. But again, most animals make that transition very well.
Joel, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Thank you for having me on.
That was K-State Extension livestock specialist Joel DeRouchey. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but we'll be right back.
This is Agriculture Today. Along with Shelby Varner, I'm Jeff Wickman. Insect pest activity in Kansas continues to pick up. This week, K-State horticultural entomologist Raymond Cloyd has an update on bagworms, the Japanese beetle, the Harlequin bug, the ash gray blister beetle, and lace bugs. Raymond, you were mentioning to me the fact that bagworms are present, but maybe not as prevalent as they have been.
That's absolutely correct, Jeff. I mean, the calls and the emails I've gotten in previous years are much less so this year. I've actually walked around campus in other areas, and I have difficulty even finding bagworms. Now, that doesn't mean we should be complacent. If you do see bagworms, we've already mentioned applications of BTK, which is a bacteria that only kills caterpillars, and also the other one is spinosad, sold as Captain Jack's Dead Bug Brew. Now, those products will only work if the bags are about a 1/4 inch less. If you start seeing larger bags, 1/2 inch, then you're going to have to use some of the more potent toxic materials that are harmful to beneficial insects and pollinators. And of course, if there's not very many, you can just simply hand remove them, place them in the soapy water for about 15 minutes, and then put them out in a hot area and they'll die. All this information is in our extension publication on bagworms that you can access online, or you can contact your county extension office and obtain more information about bagworms.
Japanese beetle, though, still present.
Japanese beetles are coming out. Their numbers are less so depending on where you're at. But yeah, we see them feeding on roses and linden trees and some of their favorite plants. And of course, the only way to deal with Japanese beetle is either hand picking them or spraying with a common insecticide. And again, most of these insecticides that are out there are broad spectrum and will kill pretty much everything. The beneficial insects, the pollinators, and other insects that are in the area. Carbaryl, which used to be in the formulations of 7, is being phased out. So when you buy the product called 7, brand name, it's got pyrethroids in it, gamma cyhalothrin, lambda cyhalothrin, bifenthrin. Those will kill Japanese beetles, but again, they're also going to kill the beneficial insects too. And you have to be very careful about spraying for Japanese beetles too frequently, because if you do, then you could stimulate an outbreak of two-spotted spider mites.
You also wanted to talk about the Harlequin bug, something I'm not familiar with.
Yeah, the Harlequin bug is basically a vegetable pest. It's a very brightly orange, black, white, beautiful-looking insect, the adult and the nymph. They primarily feed on kohlrabi, horseradish, and brassicas, and we've seen some substantial damage on brassicas in some of the community gardens and other areas that are out there. They will also feed on some ornamentals like cleome. We've seen them feed on those, but this seems to be a banner year for Harlequin bugs. So you can spray them, you can hand remove them, both the adults and the nymphs from the plants. But this has been, I was out visiting a producer, and I have to admit that it was the worst infestation I've ever seen in a long time of Harlequin bugs, feeding on the brassicas, and at the point that they're basically going to be unmarketable. And we have an extension publication on the Harlequin bug that talks about the damage, the biology, and the management strategies that can be implemented to minimize the damage caused by the adults and the nymphs.
Blister beetles, especially the ash gray beetle?
Yes, this has been an interesting year for blister beetles, particularly the ash gray, and we've seen the 3-lined blister beetle, but the ash gray is the one that feeds on tomatoes and eggplant, and we've seen substantial damage on plants. They'll also feed some ornamental plants at the same time. So they emit a material called cantharidin, and it can burn you. So if you're dealing with blister beetles, wear gloves, maybe wear goggles. You can hand pick them off plants. That can be very effective. Put them in soapy water, and that'll kill them. You can spray them, but you're going to have to spray frequently, probably once a week, to minimize the damage they cause to plants, especially at the numbers we're seeing, or the abundant numbers we're seeing this year.
And lace bugs?
Lace bugs are out there. They're feeding on oaks. They're really not a concern. Green lacewing larvae will eat them. You'll typically see the white egg on a stalk. They'll feed on aster. We've seen some asters that are exhibiting damage, and that may be time to do some spray applications. But on oak trees and large sycamores, we don't recommend sprays. I mean, the trees will be all fine, and there are beneficial insects that will probably be feeding on the larvae and the adult stages of the lace bugs.
I think we mentioned this last time, but one more reminder that the publication on mosquitoes in Kansas is out.
That is true, Jeff. In June, we finished it. It is out, called Mosquitoes in Kansas, and it's available from your extension office and from the bookstore.
That's K-State horticultural entomologist Raymond Cloyd with an update on summer insect pest activity. And that'll do it for this edition of Agriculture Today. For Shelby Varner, I'm Jeff Wickman. This is the K-State Radio Network.